Hello, everyone. We are going to get started. I think we're maybe 1 or 2 minutes late. Usually we're right at noon, so forgive our tardiness. We're really happy to have all of you here today to talk about such a fantastic topic, promise and challenges of gene therapy. And Barnes & Thornburg is super excited, as always, to be able to host this event. Kristen and I we say this every time, we've lost track, we have no idea how long we've been doing this, but one thing we do know is that this is only the second or third time that we've had everybody all in person, and so it's lovely to see you all. I'm not going to say anything more than that because we have a great program and I want to get right to it. Oh, I am going to say one more thing, sorry. You do have cards on your table. I'll be taking a look out for those. If you have questions, please jot those down. And again, I'll be paying attention. I'll come around and pick those up and hand those off to Kristen, who can make sure to wrap those into the conversation. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen Jones. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't introduce you. I'm Deborah Pollock-Milgate, Kristen Jones, CEO and President of IHIF, and I'm going to give it right over to her to start off. See, like I've been doing it so long, I have no clue.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Deborah. As Deborah mentioned, I'm Kristen Jones. I'm President and CEO of the Indiana Health Industry Forum. We're the life sciences trade association here in the state. I think most of you are familiar with us. If you're not, welcome. If this is your first event, welcome. If this is not your first event, welcome back. As Deborah said, this is I think the second one since COVID. Yeah, just to paraphrase, to correct that, where we've had everybody back in the room and not done a hybrid version, but that's not to say we won't do hybrid versions in the future, but this one, it's the networking, this is the connecting back up with people. So we think it's really important to be here. So thank you for joining us today. I am really excited to introduce our panel. We've been working very closely with Stacey Relaford with Pfizer and some other folks on this panel for a couple of months now. And the behind the scenes parts of bringing these together and getting people here and finding the right panelist is always a little bit of an adventure and a challenge. But we seem to do a really good job with it. So this is yet another example. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm just going to introduce people from this end down, I guess, back towards me. Mike Capaldi, Executive Director for the Institute for Gene Therapies. And you're out of Minnesota, correct?
No, the organization is Washington, D.C. based.
Okay. Apologies
No
for
worries.
that one. Laura McLinn is the founder of the Best Day Ever Foundation. Welcome. And Anna Talaga is the medical director for U.S. Medical Affairs for Pfizer, who's here with us today. So thank you and welcome everybody. I think it's always better, I can sit here and read bios or let people, some people may have done that already proactively. But I think it's always best to have folks to understand kind of where you're coming from and what your relationship is into the conversation today. So we're gonna pass that down the line, I think. But Anna, actually, if you want to start, just tell me a little bit about yourself and your role and what drew you into gene therapy.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
Oh, I should be on.
Hello?
Yep, there you go.
Be a little closer. My name is Anna. I, as Kristen mentioned, I'm the U.S. Medical Director at Pfizer, and I specifically work on our Duchenne muscular dystrophy gene therapy program. I am a neuroscientist and geneticist by training, and I've kind of been passionate about rare disease for a very long time, and I feel like right now is the most exciting time for, patients and for scientists. It's been a long time coming, bringing gene therapy to patients. So I feel like it's just such a historical moment that we're kind of living through right now. And just kind of where I'm coming from. And I'm sure Laura will talk a little bit more about, kind of the patient aspect of it. But coming from the pharmaceutical space, it's really exciting too for genetic medicines and gene therapy in particular.
Absolutely. Laura, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you how you got involved here.
I'll try to do that in 30 seconds, 10 years.
You got more than that. Take a velocity.
So I'm Laura McLennan. My son Jordan has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This year marks 10 years since he was diagnosed here at Riley. You've probably heard this story before, but when Jordan was diagnosed, we were given zero hope. We were told he had a life expectancy of about 20 and that the FDA does not move very fast and we would probably never see a treatment in his lifetime. He is now 14 as of yesterday. He is walking and thriving and truly living his life with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He was one of 16 boys who participated in a clinical trial for NS Pharma's Viltepso, which is an exon skipping treatment. And that treatment is now FDA approved through the accelerated approval pathway. So I'm excited that the narrative has changed and that today we can talk about things like combo therapies and getting payers to pay and all kinds of exciting things. So, and I'm also the founder of the Best Day Ever Foundation. We support families here in Indiana who are living with Duchenne and other rare diseases. We help them navigate things like Medicaid waivers, which is a pathway in Indiana that helps you get traditional Indiana Medicaid, which can be another option for getting payers to pay for these treatments that we were told would never exist. So exciting stuff.
And hello, everyone. My name is Mike Cavaldi. I'm the Executive Director for the Institute for Gene Therapies. I'll tell you all about the Institute a little bit later, but just briefly about me. I grew up in the neighboring state of Ohio, and way back a long time ago, in the 90s when people would have live events, motivational speakers. You remember those? They bring them all together, Lou Holtz, Zig Ziglar, these types of people. I don't even know who said this, but one of them said, when choosing a career, you should choose a career that allows you to enjoy what you're doing and more importantly, has a positive impact on people's lives. And so I'm very fortunate that at that time, I had the opportunity to choose a career in life sciences, specifically a biopharmaceutical company known as Sanofi. And I spent 20 plus years there. And the enriching part about that experience was getting to watch innovation take people from zero hope, as you just heard from Laura, and increase that. And even an increase of 1% is a 100% 100% increase of no hope. And so after leaving Sanofi, I went out on my own independently, and in looking at opportunities, this opportunity for the Institute for Gene Therapies came available. And for me, it represented the cutting edge of the next level of innovation that you'll hear about from today, of something that I wanted to be a part of. I was no longer a young buck choosing a career, but how could I have an impact with my experience? And so I'm excited to tell you more about what we're doing at the Institute later. So thank you.
Well, Anna, I think you're first up. If you'd like to, I think your slides are first.
Yeah,
up.
sure.
If you would like to give that a talk through and.
Yeah, definitely. So I think in order to kind of start off our conversation today, it's important to kind of level set and talk about rare diseases and why gene therapy is particularly amenable as a treatment for rare diseases rather than other disorders. So I'm going to introduce you to rare diseases very generally, then talk about gene therapy, and then kind of talk about why do we care. So next slide, please.
Oh, I think if you want to.
Oh, yeah,
Do you want to do it or?
Yeah, sure.
The micro, you can probably put the microphone. Cool, IT.
Okay, awesome. So worldwide, there's about 400 million people that are living with rare diseases. Even though rare diseases, each one individually really doesn't affect, millions of people, collectively, it affects millions of people. So, there's 7,000 known rare diseases, and there's probably plenty more that are unknown genetic origin, and only 5% have available treatments. So there's a massive unmet need to find kind of treatments for rare diseases. 80% of these are genetic in origin, and probably something like over 50% affect children, and that's because of the genetic nature of these diseases. So what really causes a genetic disease or a genetic disorder? It's really just genetic mutations. So obviously our genes are kind of the blueprint for how each cell in the body functions. And we have 30 million codes of DNA. And if even one of these codes is kind of mutated or altered, it causes a genetic disorder. So these can cause really severe disability and significantly limit life expectancy. They might be inherited. A lot of them are inherited. Sometimes they aren't inherited and they are spontaneous. So it's really an important cause of child disability and mortality and morbidity. So, because of this, gene therapy can really be administered in childhood to reduce that disability and prolong life. So gene therapy is really kind of this new next generation of medicines where a functioning gene is delivered back into the body, into the target tissue to produce the protein that might be missing or that doesn't function really well. So we're really using genes as the medicine in this case, and we're really able to target the underlying cause of disease at the cellular level. And this is with potentially, although we don't know, one treatment. So really this kind of has the potential to offer us long-term transformative benefits for patients with rare diseases. So just to put this in historical context, the first kind of gene therapy trials were in the 1990s. And there was 2 boys in 2000 in France that had an X-linked skin disorder. They were called, bubble boys, and they were cured using gene therapy. And since then, we've really come a long way. So the first gene therapy that was really licensed in Europe or approved in Europe was to treat a disorder called lipoprotein lipase deficiency. That was never approved in the US, however. So the first FDA approval was a therapeutic called Luxturna. And Luxturna was for a retinal disease. It's a gene therapy for just specifically this genetic disorder. And since then, there's really been an explosion in this field. So there's currently probably more than 150 investigational new drug applications for gene therapies. And there's 3 approved gene therapies right now. And there's plenty more kind of cellular and genetic medicines, but only 3 gene therapies. And in the next 5 years, we really think that there's going to be, upwards of 20 cell and gene therapy approvals expected. So, this is kind of why we care, right? As a healthcare system, the reason we care is because there's going to be a high number of cell and gene therapies that are anticipated in these coming years. So by 2030, we're looking at 50, even though right now we have, significantly less than that. And the annual number of patients that are going to be treated with these therapies will really, it's going to be in the thousands, where currently it's very few. So this really has the ability to kind of transform the healthcare system as a whole. So just really briefly, I'll kind of touch upon the potential benefits again. So to patients and caregivers, and Laura's going to talk a lot more about that, about her personal experience, really transforming healthcare systems, reducing the need for ongoing treatments or occurrence of disease-related complications. And then obviously society as a whole, where patients can live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. And I think that's kind of the broad intro to rare diseases and gene therapy. Not sure if we want to wait for questions.
Yes, we will. If, again, all of you have note cards in front of you, if you have a question, just write it down. Deborah will be lurking in the background. Then come pick those up and share them with me. Laura, if you'd like to go, you know how to get to your thing? We'll keep our fingers crossed. We seem to be lucky on the IT side, although I just cursed it by saying that, but. Escape. Okay.
Jordan and me. I do want to warn you that I just put these slides together this morning. I was going to try to just talk, and then I woke up early this morning. I said, I think I'm just going to put a few photos together to kind of just guide my story. And so that's what they are, is mostly photos. And I also want to warn you that my oldest daughter just started graduation week this morning. So I've been crying since last night since she asked me to iron her robe. So if you look at me, I might just start crying. I don't know, but I'm going to try not to. So I am Laura. I am a Duchenne mom. We kind of talked a little bit about genetics earlier. Duchenne is also an X-linked inherited muscle wasting disease. However, 1 in 3 times it happens just because of a spontaneous random thing. And that's what happened to Jordan. I'm not a carrier. I had never heard of Duchenne muscular dystrophy until 10 years ago when Jordan was diagnosed. There's a way to get rid of the top. If not, it's not that big of a deal.
I think you're the only one.
Yeah. It's okay. It's not a big deal. So this is just about our diagnosis, which was 10 years ago. So Jordan was almost 4 years ago. We were given no hope for a treatment in his lifetime. And the only way I know how to describe those first 2 to 3 weeks or so is we literally felt like we were mourning when we left Riley Hospital. We were given zero hope. And I kind of shared a little bit about that earlier. So that's how our journey began. Duchenne is a genetic muscle wasting disease. It affects about 1 in 5,000 boys. Because it's found on the X chromosome, it does primarily affect males. Females can be diagnosed with Duchenne, but it's very rare. I already mentioned that 1 out of 3 times it occurs due to a spontaneous mutation. I did have genetic testing done and learned that I was not a carrier. However, you don't see very much about this, but I later learned that it didn't mean that my girls were out of the woods. So even though we were told that, because I was not a carrier, there is something called a germline carrier. And this is a little different. It doesn't show up on the genetic testing. So there is still a chance that my girls could be carriers of Duchenne. We have not gone through that process, but as I told you, my Bella is graduating high school this week. And so we will start to have those conversations and we'll see what they want to do because it's really their decision. Duchenne is a very devastating disease. It's muscle wasting over time. You will see as we talk a little bit about what can happen. We were told that by the time Jordan was a teenager, he would not be walking. He would be full-time in a wheelchair. That is not the case for Jordan today. We feel very blessed, but there still is no cure for Duchenne. And so I am super excited about gene therapy, gene editing, other drugs that are coming up in the pipeline, because even though my son is on an approved therapy, at this point, until we have a cure, I really believe it's going to be a combo of therapies that are going to be the best option. So given this diagnosis, when Jordan was 5, I did what any mom would do. And I said, you know what, he needs to get a job. So I made a resume for him and went to the fire department, and this made national news. It was really fun and exciting, but Jordan was hired to be a firefighter here in Indianapolis. So fast forward a little bit, we learned that there was hope for a treatment in Jordan's lifetime. So I heard about exon skipping on the Today Show, reached out to the doctor in the middle of the night. He said, yes, Jordan could be a candidate. Bring him to me, let him be my patient. So we started seeing Dr. Jerry Mendel at Nationwide Children's Hospital. So then we had hope, and then something else happened. We learned that Jordan would most likely not qualify for the clinical trial that we were hopeful for. So we started exploring a different pathway. So at the time, I was desperate, like any mom would be. It's really devastating when you hear a fatal diagnosis. But it's even more devastating when you hear that there is a treatment and you might not be able to access it for your child. So that's a whole different layer of hurt and desperation. So we started working on a law called the Right to Try Law. You may have heard of it. It was signed into law in 2015 when Mike Pence was our governor. Jordan was there at his side when it was signed into law. We later started working on federal legislation. This is Jordan when it was signed into federal law in 2018. And then Jordan got to see that law come full circle when he got to be there when the first patient was treated through Right to Try. This is an ALS patient, and that was a really special day for us. But in the meantime, Jordan made it into a clinical trial. So not only were we fighting for Right to Try, Jordan really didn't need that pathway anymore. So he did make it into a clinical trial. And 180 weeks later, that treatment, which is called Viltepso, was FDA approved through the accelerated approval pathway. These are just a couple of pictures from his clinical trial journey. I have one of these for every week, and he is on 323 tomorrow, I think. So he now does these weekly infusions at home. And this is when the treatment was approved. This is Jordan at Lurie's Children's Hospital. I forgot to mention that we were driving to Chicago every week for the infusions. And in the midst of that, we were traveling to DC probably once every 3 weeks to testify and try to work on the legislation that we were working on. But that's the nurses singing to him and him walking out of the hospital, which we thought was So I am very excited that the narrative is changing, and I'm excited about the conversations today. You may have seen the news that last Friday, an FDA advisory committee voted 8-6 in favor of accelerated approval for the first gene therapy for DMD. I am excited because, like for my son's journey, another exon skipping treatment was actually approved before his. And I was very excited the day that happened because I knew it was going to open the door for other treatments. So even though Jordan wasn't a candidate for that one, it opened the door for the treatment he's on. And I believe that's exactly what's going to happen with this one too. So it's very exciting. So I'm excited to talk today, if the conversations go here, about combo therapies. It reminds me of the AIDS movement when we started with one treatment and then another, and that's actually where the accelerated approval pathway was born. And now we're seeing it put to use a lot with Duchenne. And we are literally watching history in the making right now, which is very exciting. This is 14. This is Jordan yesterday on his birthday. He asked for a smoker. He loves to cook. We call him Chef JJ. But this is also 14. This is one of Jordan's best friends who does not have a treatment. So this was also taken this weekend. This is Gabe. Gabe and Jordan have been MBA camp buddies for years. And just about 4 years ago, they were both running around together at MBA camp. And almost literally overnight, Gabe came off his feet. He is full-time in a power chair. He struggles to even feed himself. And this is how devastating and how quickly this disease can just ravage these kids. I want to show you really quick a video, if I can find it. And I know I'm probably taking more of my time than I'm supposed to. I'm not sure I know how to get to it. It's on the desktop. It's like a 7-second video. Here it is. Okay. How do I hit play? Oh. Okay. This is Jordan and Gabe in my driveway on Saturday. And again, I just want to remind you that these are two 14-year-old boys living with Duchenne. So gene therapy is so exciting. Gene editing, all of these treatments coming up in the pipeline are very exciting. And I want to see Jordan doing the same thing Bella was doing this morning. And I want to see Gabe doing that too. So I'm excited to talk more about this. Sorry, but also up here, so that's why you're not seeing it.
Multitasking.
All right, folks, bear with me here. Got it. We've got it. There we go.
Yeah, in the cookie first.
Honestly, I needed a little bit of time after listening to Laura's story anyway. So thank you again for sharing. The Institute, our sole focus is to support Jordan and the people that will come behind. And the work that you're doing right now is so important for that very reason. If it's okay, I'm just going to hold this. Let me tell you a little bit about the Institute for Gene Therapies. So as you saw from the timeline that Anna showed, the first gene therapy was approved about 6 years ago. And, at that time, there was a lot of excitement around the science, as you can see, and for good reason. But yet there are a lot of headwinds associated with gene therapy. Let me tell you just about 3 of the challenges that we face in the space and that we face as a society if we think that this type of precision medicine, it can be helpful for us. The first is really just education and understanding that, thanks to Anna for very quickly describing what gene therapy is. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it as well. And it takes time for people to get comfortable with it. But as you can also imagine, you go up to Capitol Hill and talk to members of Congress and their staff, and you bring up gene therapy. At least 5 years ago, they would bring up things like Chinese designer babies. So there's a lack of awareness of what's actually happening on the scientific front. Then there's the price. Let's be very open about this. When you see a 7-figure price tag for a therapy, kind of gets your attention, right? And it certainly gets lawmakers' attention. And Senator Sanders, who's not a friend of the industry, I think most of you know that, quick to point out those price tags without doing the homework to understand the correction in the disease and the cost savings that could be. So that's another battle that we fight. And then lastly, the reimbursement system. Today's reimbursement system is largely set up so that when you and I have a medical need, especially when it comes to a therapeutic option, that there is some sort of reimbursement framework, whether it's Part A that's an inpatient reimbursement system, or Part D for drugs where you go to the pharmacy and there's a negotiated rate, maybe a copay that you pay. Well, for gene therapies, it's not that simple. It really doesn't exist right now. And so as these gene therapies started to come to market, we saw an opportunity to help begin to shape and try to change the framework for how therapies are covered, accessed, and reimbursed, and specifically knowing that we would need to modernize those when it comes to gene therapy, because the science is exciting and promising, but if the healthcare system is not set up to be able to cover coverage and have access to patients and reimburse properly, then it will go away. So the Institute for Gene Therapies was formed on Valentine's Day in 2020. We like to say, I heart gene therapy there. And we are made up of, as you can see, 11, soon to be 12 organizations, biopharmaceutical, life science companies who are investing in gene therapy. The one that Laura just referenced, Sarepta, that was their product that was reviewed by the FDA advisory panel last Friday. And we're basically coming together along with other stakeholders to go about modernizing this framework. This is a little bit of our structure, and I only point this out to show you that we're made up not only of our corporate advisory council that I just showed you on the last slide, but 2 other very important councils who provide input to us: the Patient Advocacy Advisory Council and the Scientific, Academic, and Medical Advisory Council. Our patient council represents patients, family members, organizations like Laura's, like the Best Day Ever. And Laura, let me just say in front of all of these people, we would love to have you all join our council so that I could put Best Day Ever on there, because we would really like to work with you. But you can see organizations who are focused on not only their constituents and their patients and families, but also on making a difference from a policy standpoint. Because of the nature, though, of gene therapy and the complexity, we want to make sure that we're scientifically astute as well. So we work with key academic centers and medical organizations as well. So what do? Well, we work on behalf of those stakeholders to develop champions on Capitol Hill in Washington, DC, as well as champions at the state level. And we lobby them, we educate them and help them understand what gene therapy is and what's the promise associated with that, and what are the policy hurdles to making gene therapy promises come to fruition. And we do a lot of communication and education. Now, this is a really busy slide eye chart right now. Some of you might have to pull your glasses off, I understand. And I won't go through this in detail for you, but in a nutshell, the types of things that we're trying to effectuate are, first of all, create a statutory authority for a novel reimbursement construct. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you have a 7-figure therapy that is potentially curative and potentially durable over a lifetime, well, then how about if we pay for that in a different way than we do today, which is a bit transactional? So that's just an example. There are regulatory barriers associated with gene therapies that we're trying to overcome as well. And we're also trying to make sure that we're advocating for the value associated with those. And then lastly, additional obstacles that exist for families who are pursuing gene therapy, things like newborn screening. You know, the first step in access is knowing that you even have a genetic mutation that leads to one of these rare diseases. So we support our work in newborn screening as well. This is a bit of a shameless plug for you to go to gene-therapies.org so that you can be part of our digital family, so that you can visit our website. There's a lot of information there that's available if you'd like to learn more, but following us on whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn, you can stay up to date on some of the issues that I'll be talking about today. We have various other events. Our patient advocacy council members do some great blogs where you can hear about their personal stories, much like you heard from Laura today, as well as updates on the policies that we're working on. And then lastly, on this idea of value, we recently introduced what we're calling the gene therapy value principles, which helps to enable people to think beyond, and I'm not sure about the black screen there, but you'll see it on gene-therapies.org. But we want to go beyond the cost. So when you hear a $3.5 million gene therapy for hemophilia type A in your eyeballs, well, we want you to look beyond just that number, because when you learn more about it, like what's the societal impact of treating a patient who might cost the system $10 million over their lifetime, then we want to start to change the conversation, change the narrative for value. And so our gene therapy value principles do a nice job of that in really layman's terms. And then lastly, looking at when we talk about value, what are some of the elements associated with that, whether it's the disease state itself, some of the treatment factors, impact to the system, as well as society impact. We're looking at all of those as well. So that's just a little bit, again, about the Institute. Welcome your questions. And again, please visit us at gene-therapies.org.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Laura, covered the background really great, but tell us a little bit more about Best Day Ever Foundation.
I forgot to do that. And ironically, my daughters were really a big part of the inspiration for forming the Best Day Ever Foundation. When Jordan was 5 and he got his job as a firefighter, we started just being really busy and we were doing a lot of things. And at one point, I just realized that my girls, my husband, my other members of my family, like we're all living with Duchenne, not just Jordan. So we formed the Best Day Ever Foundation to support families that are living with Duchenne. So it's not just about the patient, it is about every member of the family. So every month we host an event called Living Our Best Lives with Duchenne, where we bring together families. We've now connected with more than 70 families just here in Indiana who are living with Duchenne. And we just try to bless families, we try to support families, we try to educate families, but it's really about the whole family. So one of the things that I am very passionate about is educating families on the Medicaid waivers. When Jordan was diagnosed, no one told us really till a few years ago, even what a Medicaid waiver was. I heard the word Medicaid and I instantly partnered that with low income. And I didn't think that we would qualify. We're a typical middle class family. And we didn't qualify based on our income. But what a lot of people don't know is that our loved ones living with Duchenne, we have two waivers here in Indiana, the family supports waiver and the aged and disabled waiver that our loved ones with Duchenne qualify for. And if you qualify for one of those, which you will, because I will make sure that you do, once you have that, it's an automatic pathway to get traditional Indiana Medicaid as a secondary healthcare plan. Why does that matter, especially in Indiana? Well, Indiana is a wonderful state to live in with Duchenne. We do not have many problems getting exon skipping therapies covered with Indiana Medicaid. Also, our corticosteroid, that's standard of care. So if families have trouble getting their commercial insurance to pay, having Medicaid as a secondary is a great backup plan. So that's one of the things that I'm most passionate about that Bessie ever does.
Mike, actually, maybe send it back that way. Sorry. Mike, one of the questions we've had a couple times so far, what gene therapies are approved and for which diseases at this point?
Sure. So as you heard earlier, there are three, and I think a recent fourth one actually just got approved, but Luxturna, which is approved for a retinal disorder, and again, an amazing therapy. You watch these patients in a video who are able to navigate a maze that typically they wouldn't have because of their lack of sight. That was 2017. The Novartis product, Zolgensma, was approved, I think, around 18 or 19 for spinal muscular atrophy. Anna, thank you. And these are, it's in the same family, if you will, as Duchenne. And it's been on the market and doing very well. And I've seen the videos of somebody who was diagnosed at 2 years old and now is able to play with a basketball and slam it, which I know is a big thing here in Indiana. And then most recently, there was a Bluebird Bio product for a rare blood disorder, drawing a blank on, it's not sickle cell, but that's coming. That's the next wave. There are a couple of sickle cell products, but it's a pretty rare blood disorder. Ferring also had a bladder cancer gene therapy, which is a little bit different, that was approved late last year. And then also the CSL Behring product for hemophilia part A was recently approved. That's the one that drew headlines with the price tag and has, been beaten up in the press. But again, $3.5 million sounds like a lot, but when you start to look at some of the economic studies that show over that patient's lifetime, you're saving the system upwards of $6-7 million. Then all of a sudden you start looking at things differently than just the cost in an annual medical budget. So those are the ones that are approved. And then a few have been approved in Europe. And then lastly, my colleague over here mentioned sickle cell. That's probably the most exciting next phase for gene therapy. I think you're going to see there are 2 to 3 programs right now that are starting to come to fruition. So pay attention to the headlines as well as gene-therapies.org to learn more about that, because that's a larger patient population than has been treated in any of the ones that I've mentioned thus far, and will, frankly, I think, put downward pressure on our reimbursement system to start to adopt some of these alternative payment models and other solutions that IGT is advocating for on an ongoing basis.
A quick add-on to that, maybe. One of the other questions is what other countries are approving gene therapies? Is there somebody, and I think they're getting to the point, is there somebody farther ahead that we are in this game, or are we really, is the US leading in this effort, or where do we kind of sit in that competitive?
Great question. In the EU, in Europe, their approval system is not unlike the FDA. I would say the approvals, if they come earlier, it's more about the program and the application, et cetera. It's not around the innovation that's happening. What I would tell you, though, is the European system is set up more so with what are called health technology assessments. And so, the way that therapies are approved by government payers, because as you know, in Europe, largely the government pays for all of healthcare. And those healthcare technology assessments basically do the math for how much they're willing to reimburse for a product. And that's, very problematic for this class, because as I told you with the value of gene therapies, it's a very different calculus. And so the healthcare technology assessments that have been used in the past are not going to be useful for this particular class. So I think what you'll find is, I think in the near term, will be in parallel with US and Europe as far as approvals go, depending on the company's choice to seek approval based on, the value ultimately. But it's up to us to create a system and to upgrade the system in a way that it unleashes the promise of these gene therapies going forward.
Anna, I think the next question might be for you. Please describe how gene therapies are delivered to patients.
So right now, the three basically approved gene therapies, the traditional way of approval is actually IV infusion. So the patients actually come to the hospital and they have an IV infusion over a couple of hours. And this is just a one-time treatment. And I know you heard Laura talking about how therapy is administered to her boy. And that's kind of similar, but that can be done either at home or in the hospital setting. It's a little bit different type of genetic medicine. It's not a gene therapy the way that we're kind of talking about it now. And that one is given weekly. But traditional gene therapies are one-time infusion, in a hospital setting, basically.
I was curious, are there any stable transformations going on that changes the patient's genome? Or are these all transient gene expressions?
Yeah, so right now, what the gene therapy actually is it's basically a viral infection that has the DNA in it, and then it hones to the target cells. And then the kind of mini gene in the case of DMD is expressed in those cells, or like the mini SMA1 gene in the case of Zolgensma, the therapy that's currently on the market. So we're adding DNA. It's not integrating into the genome. It's just going to be floating around in the cell, and basically it's going to be making that mini protein that would be missing. So that's kind of logistically how the gene therapies work now.
Is anybody working on stable transformation to really cure it? Change the patient's genes so they're cured once and for all with either CRISPRs or TALENs or anything?
Yeah, so that's kind of so I would say right now, in terms of the history of gene therapy, we're really at the beginning. So the types of gene therapies that are approved are exactly, as I said, they're AAV non-integrating. They float around in the cells and kind of just hang out there and make the protein that, is lacking. The next generation is, better delivery systems. And then CRISPR-Cas9, you're actually going to be editing the genome. And that's really, really early clinical trials right now. But that's basically the next generation, maybe even the third generation.
One more question. After the COVID vaccines, I think a lot of people learned about RNA. Are any of these RNA therapies, or is it all DNA therapy?
Yes.
Yes.
Before we get too far, it'd be really important because we can't pick up your questions. We got to reiterate it or something here. So
Yeah, so maybe you could talk about the PMO oligonucleotides. That's a genetic medicine. It's a little bit different than a gene therapy, but that one actually is RNA based.
That's what it's like. Is at the RNA level. So
What's RNA?
DNA to RNA.
it's not DNA. It's not a
Yeah.
permanent fix. I know that.
Protein.
Yeah, basically. So, DNA is in our cells. That's our genetic code. And then the ultimate product of DNA are proteins, but there's an intermediary mRNA that comes in the middle.
mRNA.
Messenger RNA. Yep.
Yes, ma'am. And again, if you go to gene-therapy, we have a gene therapy 101 page that is fantastic, and I didn't write it, which is the best part.
One more thing though about that is how, I'm not a scientist, but as she was talking about how with the gene therapy, it is a microdystrophin, mini dystrophin that is going in. Jordan's treatment though, because it's a messenger RNA treatment, they can actually be combined together. So I think that is super exciting. And I've actually heard from several leading DMD doctors that even though it's not being talked about widely yet, and I think it's because people are afraid of the payers paying for a treatment like exon skipping and gene therapy, but the potential of those two together is very exciting.
Yeah, and I can reiterate that, like, I have heard from payers that are, really worried about the costs of these combination therapies, but that's the future. So, and that kind of is why it's so important that, organizations like Mike's organization kind of are trying to change the way we're thinking about reimbursement for these, because payers right now just, they're treating gene therapy like it's a drug, but it's not. It should be treated more like a transplantation, basically. We treat organ transplantation very differently than we treat, just taking an oral pill for a psoriasis or something. So really there has to be a shift in the landscape in order to kind of reflect the value of these gene therapies better.
Mike, could you maybe go into a little bit more detail on what that might look like, just so we,
Sure, I think, and the good news is there's been some progress that's been made in the last couple of years. First of all, the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS for short. So this is the regulatory arm of the government that decides how much funding or reimbursement therapies and other treatment gets. And in 2022, they put out a rule that basically allows manufacturers to contract, and they're called value-based payment contracts with the states. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means, there's no expectation from, my members or others in the life sciences space that you just develop something and it just gets paid for, right? I mean, everybody goes into the development process getting excited about the promise, but also understanding, well, what's the opportunity that's available and is this realistic? And so what that means is that Pfizer or others can enter into a value-based agreement, which basically negotiates the price and outcomes associated with that therapy over time. And then in the midst of that agreement, there could be a discount if the therapy is not durable, or different levels of cost associated with the negotiation. How do you pay for it? Do you pay for it over time? That's another way of doing it. And so again, the federal government has stepped in to allow that, because some of the regulations that exist today didn't allow manufacturers to negotiate at the state level and provide refunds if a therapy didn't work, that kind of thing. It doesn't allow it. So that's progress. The next step is, looking at other utility issues. Like, for example, Laura talks about how great of a state you have here in Indiana. Well, sometimes the center of excellence where you have to be treated for these types of therapies is in another state. And reimbursement doesn't always follow the patient across state lines. And so how do we work on things like portability, as an example? And then lastly, and this is more big picture, but the more gene therapy competition that there is, that's a good thing for all of us as well, because the technology gets better, we all make each other better, and the negotiating power gets better as well. And lastly, the only other thing that I want to underscore here is the infrastructure that will be required to deliver gene therapies at scale is significant. So the investment that is required into the industry by the industry is really important. And so if we've got to get this ecosystem in balance with allowing for the reimbursement of the therapies, because if we don't, then investment will dry up on the front end, and then we won't see some of the great stories that we shared with you today.
and I think this next one might be for you. Trying to read the hand. It's okay. I think they're looking at our big pharma companies investing in developing orphan drugs, but maybe more to the point, are most gene therapies right now targeting rare and orphan diseases? If that's
Yeah, they are. And that's really by nature and by science. So, you know, orphan diseases are those that don't have a treatment. Well, genetic diseases don't have a treatment because the only way you can treat them is at the genetic level. So really, you know, all of these gene therapies are for orphan indications, just, you know, diseases that don't have any treatments available. And like I said, there's something like 7,000 rare diseases. We have 3 approved gene therapies. So we've got a long way to go. And again, it's just the first generation of gene therapies. So there's going to be improvements, you know, at every single level.
the next one I think might be for you as well. Will these therapies be offered in utero to head off potential birth defects or disease?
Yeah,
Next generation
yeah.
or 2?
Yeah, that, I mean, you know, I guess that does actually bring up an interesting question because the current genetic disorders, you know, there's not newborn screening or in utero screening for a lot of these. So the one we commonly think about where you're screening in utero is Down syndrome, and that's a trisomy. It's a genetic disorder where you have an extra chromosome. Well, you know, for these rare genetic disorders, and there's 7,000, we're not screening for those in utero. There's a subset of disorders that people screen for when the child is born. Duchenne is not one of them. You know, advocates are trying to get Duchenne on the list of disorders that you do screen for. And there have been, you know, kind of a lot of efforts made towards that. And right now Duchenne is diagnosed at about 4 or 5 years of age. So, you know, you can't get a gene therapy if you haven't been diagnosed, basically.
Laura, I'm gonna start wrapping up, I guess, a little bit here with you. But it's so important to have the patient voice in all of this. Have you been involved in, or we may have more questions, anything on the regulatory side, informing regulators on this impact? Do you feel like the voices are being heard at that level, or is there a lot more work to do there too?
A big yes. I actually gave the final testimony at Sarepta's exon skipping treatment for Exondys, which was our first exon skipping therapy that was approved. I will never forget Janet Woodcock looking me in the eye as I spoke, and I talked about dystrophin and how we don't know, you know, how much dystrophin matters, but I know, and as you can see by looking at Jordan, dystrophin matters. And even though we don't know yet, and we have so much to learn, I do think that they listened that day. I think the patient voice made every difference in the world. There were 52 testimonies given that day. Last Friday, I watched another FDA AdCom, which was virtual, and thankfully we had an adult patient living with Duchenne that was actually one of the voting members of the advisory board. And the comments that he made, the questions that he asked were just so insightful. And I believe in my heart it made all the difference in the positive vote that came, which was an 8-6 vote to move that therapy forward. So yes, I think it makes a difference.
And you personally have made a very big difference in that one. Excuse me, I'm going to open this one up to whoever might like it. So we may pass that back down there. Do gene therapies need to be made bespoke for each patient? Is that why they are so expensive? And if it's not customization, what, aside from the research pieces of it, what
Right.
really is driving some of the costs?
So right now, you know, to basically make a gene therapy somewhat commercially viable, it has to be for a certain, you know, number of people with that genetic disorder. But there are a lot of pushes right now for making these bespoke gene therapies for what are called ultra rare genetic disorders. And I think the definition might be like if there's less than 100 patients that have this specific mutation, that's a custom gene therapy. So that's, there's been case studies of giving a therapy, an ultra rare gene therapy. So they're out there. It's just, far and few between.
And maybe just a quick comment. This gets back to the infrastructure again. 100 years ago, we didn't have an immunization infrastructure to manufacture vaccines. Let's divorce ourselves of the COVID vaccine for just a moment, because as a colleague over there said, it's different. It was 100 years ago that the life sciences companies were able to develop the infrastructure and that's required, the manufacturing capacity that's required to develop, the flu vaccine on an annual basis, the polio, we've eradicated polio because of that. I think it's very similar in gene therapy is if we continue to have some of these small successes and companies invest and build out that capacity, then I think you see more collaborations and partnerships that can enable it to be even more precise over time for the individual patient. So when we talk about precision medicine, going in and correcting your gene, I mean, that's potentially the holy grail. That's what we want, but we need the infrastructure to be able to do that.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
So I just thought of this looking at Abby here, who's here from Senator Braun's office. So I just want to say that, as you may or may not know, the FDA not only has the authority, but they actually have the responsibility to take the patient experience into the regulatory process now. So for those of you that may be here from startup companies or other companies working on therapies, please keep that in mind as you go through that process. Sometimes drugs that come up for approval get an FDA AdCom meeting, sometimes they don't. I was preparing for that day before Jordan even started his clinical trial, taking videos, keeping evidence of everything, because it's not just that the patients can have a voice, the FDA is required to allow them to give their voice and to take that experience into account.
Thank you for our panel today. This has been enlightening as it could be. I think this is a topic we're going to be revisiting many, many more times here. So I want to thank everyone else for attending today. Great, fantastic questions. I hope we covered everybody's. I think I got through most of them. But please take a moment to thank our guest afterwards if you need to. But with that, thank you so much for joining. Just a quick note, we're going to be taking our summer break for the next couple of months, but we will be back in the fall with a new lineup. So stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Laura, I just say here, that's when we something about, I'm going to run. You did before us with your recommendation. It is fire.
Oh, yes. Yes.
We get started here in Indiana, and you probably know this, I can't remember exactly all the details, but we started a committee or a commission. Council.
I want to be a part of
I'm
it.
gonna make sure that they get a really good part.
I do.
You'll be a great representative on that council. I will send a letter to Speaker Bray.
Thank you so much. I love that. Yeah.